Good morning, everyone. This morning's reading from Rays of the One Light with commentaries by Swami Kriyananda on the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible. And this morning, first things first. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. That expression, first things first, is a piece of counsel often given to students of business techniques. It is the advice of practicality to those who aspire to worldly success. But according to Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below. That which works best in one level of life is often the best guide to what will work best on every other level. If a person is true to his highest priorities, he will generally find that his other needs are fulfilled naturally as well. This is true certainly of the search for God. One of the greatest sayings of Jesus Christ was this simple sentence in the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Paramahansa Yogananda gave his elder brother Ananta a wonderful lesson in this truth. It was Ananta who had captured him and brought him back from his flight to the Himalayas, described by Yogananda in Autobiography of a Yogi. In Yogananda's book, we read how Ananta later challenged him in the city of Agra to pit his divine faith against such practical worldly considerations as the need for earning a living. Fearless before that challenge, the young aspirant agreed to go by train without any money to the nearby town of Brindaban, not to miss a single meal in Brindaban, and to find his way back to Agra without begging and without in any other way asking for help. In one of the most thrilling chapters in the book, Yogananda fulfilled all the conditions of the test. Yogananda continued the account. As the tale was unfolded, my brother turned sober, then solemn. The law of demand and supply reaches into subtler realms than I had supposed. Ananta spoke with a spiritual enthusiasm never before noticeable. I understand for the first time your indifference to the vaults and vulgar accumulations of the world. Late as it was, my brother insisted that he receive Diksha, or initiation into Kriya Yoga. And as the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 9th chapter, those who worship lesser gods go to lesser gods, but those who worship me come to me. And thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. So as Swami referred to two penniless boys in Brindaban, I thought I'd retell that story for you. Yogananda and his friend Jitendra were going to visit his brother Ananta in Agra, who at that time was working for the railway. He was one of the supervising accountants. And Yogananda and Jitendra came, and of course Yogananda and his brother had gotten into a familiar banter, and Ananta, his brother, said, well, Father would serve you right, or it would serve you right if Father took you out of his inheritance. And Yogananda said, well, my inheritance I expect to come from my Heavenly Father. And Ananta said, well, then he said, you really think that if that invisible hand comes down and tries to feed you, I think you're going to starve? And Yogananda said, no. He said, I have conscious independence towards my relationship with God, and I expect Him to fulfill my needs. And so Ananta said, well then, if that's the case, what I'd like for you to do is go to Brindaban. And Brindaban is where Krishna spent most of his time. He said, I'd like you to go to Brindaban, and you can only go, and you can't take any money. You can't beg. You've got to get a meal while you're there. You cannot tell anyone why you were there, and you've got to return back here by midnight tonight. And I want you to take a witness. And Jitendra, who happened to be standing there with his mouth wide open, as Yogananda said, Ananta looked to him and said, "This is your witness. Take him with you." And poor Jitendra was like, "Ba ba 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 ba," you know. And he said, "You must return by midnight, and if you do all of this, I will then take Kriya Yoga." So Yogananda said, "Fine." And Jitendra said, "Oh, Ananta, can you please give us just a couple of rupees?" He said, "Because, what if we get into trouble? Then I can wire you." And Yogananda looked at him and said, "Jitendra?" And Jitendra said, "Well, the sound of clinking coins, He said, they make me feel a little more secure." And Yogananda said, "There's no way I will go if you take anything from him." So he said, "Okay." So Ananta escorted them to the train station. They were only wearing dhotis, and dhotis are just little things from the waist down that cover the legs. And he was convinced that they didn't have any extra money with them, and he put them on the train. So they're on the train headed towards Vrindavan, and they'd gone quite a while. And Yogananda said, all of a sudden, Jitendra reached over and pinched him in a very uncomfortable spot. And he started in on, I have no idea where this food is going to come from. When are we going to get a meal? There's no sign that we're going to get any kind of a meal. Yogananda just said, "Oh, ye of little faith, just relax." So they continued on the train ride. And then they got to a stop, which was right before Vrindavan, and these two gentlemen came on. And they sat opposite them on the train. And the two men, one of them looked at Yogananda and he said, "Oh, I see you're trying to escape your parents and your family. You were going to the giver of love or the heart of hearts to see our Sri Krishna and visit his sites." And Yogananda said, "It's none of your business." And and the man said, "Well, I'm of a devotional nature." He said, "Please allow us to host you, and we could offer you a meal and a place to stay to get out of the heat." And Yogananda said, "No, that's not necessary, and for your information, we are not trying to escape my family." And so they sat for a while, and then they got off the train, all four of them, and these two men linked their arms into Yogananda's and to Jitendra's arms, and they called forth a carriage, and the carriage was being drawn by a horse, and they coaxed them into the carriage, and they took them to a hermitage, a beautiful hermitage that had a beautiful lawn outside. It was made of evergreen, and they went to the front door, and there was a woman who opened the door, and her name was Gauri Ma, not to be confused with Lahiri Mahashaya's wife, but her name was Gauri Ma, and she's a very dignified woman. And the two gentlemen explained that they were going to bring visitors, but that their visitors were detained and that there were all kinds of complications. "Would you not enjoy hosting these two young gentlemen, who I believe to be great devotees of Krishna?" And she said, "Oh, absolutely. I'd love to have them come in, because I would hate to see this lovely meal that I've prepared go to waste." So the two of them went in, and she explained to them how the two patrons of their hermitage that were planning to come were of royal descent. And Yogananda said immediately Jitendra burst into tears because he couldn't handle the fact that they were going to have no meal, and now they were going to be treated like royalty. And so he burst into tears, and the woman that was standing there, she looked at him, Master said, and she seemed a little confused, but apparently she understood the quirks of adolescence. So she didn't say anything. And she was escorting them to the dining room, and then she went off to help with the rest of the meal. And Master said, "I had been waiting patiently to find that right moment when I would then reach over in a very uncomfortable spot and pinch Jitendra." And he did so, and he said, "See, you're doubting Thomas." And the woman came back, and she had a large fan with her, and so she fanned them through their meal. And then they had a 30-course meal. that was brought to them and fit for a king, absolutely any delicacy you could imagine. So they had their meal, and then it was time for them to go, and they gave their goodbyes, and she, of course, said, if you'd like to come back, by all means, anytime, you're welcome back. So the two of them walked out into this sweltering heat. They sat under a tree, and there was a young man. First Jitendra started in. Okay, now what? Am I going to see the sights here in Vrindavan? How are you going to get me back to Agra tonight? And Yogananda just said, Jitendra, just relax. He said, you now have a full belly, don't you? And so you forget God. You've forgotten God. And then this man walked up. And the man walked up, and he was a young man, and he was very pleasant looking. And he said, oh, sirs, you must be strangers to this area. Please, may I host you? And Yogananda said, no, thank you. And he's very polite. He just said, no, thank you. That won't be necessary. And the young man said, well, you won't stop me from this opportunity. And Yogananda said, well, why? Why not? And he said, well, you're my master. He said, I saw today in my meditation at noon that Krishna came to me, and he said that you were standing here. I saw two men standing here, and I looked closely at your face, and it was you. You've been coming to me in meditations for a long time. And then Yogananda said, well, I'm glad that you found me. And yes, we'd be happy to go with you. And he said, well, please let me take you to my house. He said, no, we can't go to your house because we have to meet my brother in Agra. He said, well, then let me tour you around the area. So he called forth a carriage, and he brought out and there was a horse, and then they toured all around Vrindavan that day, going to all the shrines of Krishna. And then they ended up, as it would be, as chance would have it, they ended up just right next to the train station. And he said, please, may I go in and buy some sweetmeats for you? And Yogananda said, well, yes, that would be lovely. So the man went inside, and the two of them got out of the carriage, and they started to just saunter around. And the man came back eventually. He'd been gone for quite a while. And this time he came back, and he had all of these delicacies with him. And he handed it to them. And not only that, but he handed them 2 train tickets along with a roll of rupees. And he said, please, this is my honor to do this for you. Please let me do it. Yogananda said, yes, of course. And then Master took him off, gave him Kriya initiation. They went into a secluded area. He gave him Kriya initiation, spent some time with him as Lahiri Mahashaya taught it. And then they took the train ride home. They met Ananta. Ananta quizzed Jitendra, who of course gave the full account of what had happened. And he then agreed to take Kriya Yoga. And that's the story of the 2 penniless boys in Vrindavan. Now for Master to do that, obviously that takes an awful lot of faith, doesn't it? I have a friend, and I'm sure some of you know them, it's Haridas and Roma, and they are Nayaswamis in India. And when they were first giving Sunday service, when Roma was first giving Sunday service, she insisted that it be Haridas that do all the talking. She didn't care to do it. She was kind of afraid of doing it. And so one week before a Sunday service that they were going to give, Haridas said, I don't think I can talk. And Roma looked at him and said, well, that's ridiculous. Of course, you'll be fine. You have a whole week. Don't worry about it. So it got closer and closer. And 3 days before, Roma, I really don't think I can do this. Of course, you can do it. She was in such denial. She did not prepare at all. And it came time the morning of when Haridas said, Roma, you've got to do Sunday service. She said, oh my God. It dawned on her that it was going to be her that was going to have to do it. She said, I ran into the kitchen. I started slamming cabinets. I was looking for every cold remedy you could possibly find. And she said, of course, she had to start praying. At that time, she stopped praying for Haridas and started praying for herself. And she was headed up to the altar as she was about to give service, and she looked down and glanced at a book and saw the title of a book. And that's the title of her talk. And she spoke on that during Sunday service. And again, another exercise in faith. And Master, when his brother had said to him, well, forget that, or you've got that hand that's going to reach down, that invisible hand. And Master said, I don't put my faith in passers-by. He said, my faith is in God, the Father. He said, and his brother had said to him, Yogananda, it should be money first, God second, because you don't know how long you're going to live. It could be a very long life. And Yogananda said, no, it's God first. Money is his slave, and it could be a very short life. And then he said, I consciously call my Father's aid to help me. He said, I don't depend on anything else. And that's what we all have to do. And even Swami Kriyananda one time picked up a hitchhiker. And he's driving along, and he stops and lets the man off. And the man turns to him and he says, give me your address. He said, I'm going to write to you and I'm going to pay you for this trip. He said, I'm going to pay you back. And Swami gave him his address. And he said, now, I don't want you to lose faith in human nature. And Swami thought, if I had faith in human nature, he said, I would not have made it this far. He depended solely on Divine Mother to help him meet the deadlines that he had to meet financially, or the growth that has happened with Ananda. He depended on Divine Mother. And that's what we have to do. We cannot be Jitendra with a full belly and all of a sudden forget Divine Mother. This is something that diligently we have got to be with all the time, asking for God's help first before anything else.
Thank you. I'm going to have you hand this to me here in a little bit.
Okay.
Just careful. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Devaki. That was lovely. Before I share a few thoughts, I just want to take a moment to thank Sharmila and her wonderful crew who helped so much put together the yard sale. There was a lot that went into that. I know it was quite a heavy lift, so I just want to offer my thanks and appreciation to them and for their service to God and Guru. And, as Devaki said, worldly wisdom does not tell us that it's common sense to put God first. And for us as devotees, this is so important. I remember my first lesson in this early on the path. It was about 2006 when I was asked if I might learn how to play the harmonium so that I could pitch in and join the rotation for harmonium players at Sunday service in Seattle. And I said, sure. I played the piano. I enjoyed playing. And so I learned it. And this was also at the time that I transitioned back to my last 2 years of medical school and clinical rotation. So every 6 weeks, I was doing something different: medicine, surgery, pediatrics, obstetrics, and sometimes traveling outside of Seattle for 6 weeks at a time, because University of Washington's a regional medical school for 5 states. And in addition to occasionally playing for Sunday service when I was in town, I would also get asked to play for other special events. Sometimes it would be a Kriya initiation or an equinox celebration or Master's birthday or something. Invariably, Padma would ask me to play for some special event, and it would be the night before an exam, or the night before I was leaving town for 6 weeks, or the day I was getting back, or something like that. Just seemed uncanny how that worked. And it was a challenge. I wanted to say yes, I wanted to be helpful, and yet I had these other responsibilities. And I found, to my amazement, that if I just did it and put my heart into it, that other stuff took care of itself. I passed the test, I got my bags packed, whatever. And it was really a wonderful way to begin to develop my faith on the path and know that Divine Mother had my back. And it wasn't that I couldn't study for the test. I mean, I still had to do that, right? I still had to put forth the energy. But it just all took care of itself. So I want to share another story and some thoughts on this. And this is going to seem like a bit of a deviation at first, but it's all going to come together at the end. And when I am giving service, I often like to tune into the affirmation and to try to understand why Swami paired that week's affirmation with the topic. And sometimes that's a very easy thing, easy connection for me to make, and sometimes it feels a bit more like a stretch. And this week, humor, first things first, kind of felt a little bit more like a stretch. But then I had some insight. So here it goes. When people get married when they're older in life, oftentimes they have a lot of stuff. And oftentimes they have duplicate stuff. And that was certainly the case when Alan and I got married. Although, interestingly, we discovered that between the two of us, neither of us had a proper butter dish. Now, Alan is a great fan of butter. I like it too. But, we decided we needed a butter dish after, being together for a little bit. And the holidays were coming up, and my family really likes gift ideas for the holidays. My mom is always asking me for a list, and usually she starts like in October. She likes to get her Christmas shopping done early. So I put together a short list, and I put butter dish on the list. And because sometimes I put things on these lists and they don't always come, I put 3 exclamation marks after the butter dish, hoping that they would sort of get the point and they would sort of figure out amongst themselves who was going to give us a butter dish, because I really wanted a butter dish, a proper butter dish. Now, my family also knows my tastes. I like simple things. I like nice things, but not ornate and not gaudy or flashy or that sort of thing. So on Christmas Day, Alan and I are opening up gifts, and we get to this box from my brother and sister-in-law, and it had, I think it said, my sister-in-law is a veterinarian, and I think it said something like, Humane Society gift shop or something like that. I don't know. We opened it up, we unwrapped it, and this is what we saw. Now, I'm going to invite the camera to zoom in on this so that people who are online can see this. For those of you who are in the back of the room, this little sort of figure on top here has the upper body of a cat and the lower body of a fish or a mermaid. So it's a mercat, if you will. And this mercat is sitting on top of a rock that's overlooking the ocean, and of course that's where you put your butter. And we opened this up, and just like you, we started laughing. Cute and kind of ridiculous and absurd at the same time. And but we kind of fell in love with her, and so we decided after a couple of days to name her Miranda, and Miranda the mercat. And I promise you, Miranda took a bath before coming to service today, so she wouldn't get her greasy paws all over everything. And I'm not going to be like the pastor who put the stick of butter on the Bible. It made a mess, but he was just trying to spread the word. needless to say, he was only marginally successful with that. I'm sorry I don't have any butter jokes for you this morning. So, back to our regularly scheduled program. So about a week after Christmas, we're video chatting with my brother and his family. It was my nephew's birthday. And we thanked them for Miranda. And my brother asked us, was it a 3 exclamation mark worthy butter dish? To which we answered yes. And then it was probably a couple of weeks later, I was talking to my brother again, and he said, we bought that as a gag gift, and we were going to offer to return it for you, but when we found out you had named it, and she was part of your family, we decided we better not do that. Oh. But seriously, though, I want to share with you a few of the important spiritual lessons that Miranda has taught me. And the first is, a lot of times when we ask God for things, we're not very specific. We think we are. We think we know what we want. I wanted a butter dish. I even sort of put 3 exclamation mark butter dish, but I'm not, sort of thinking in that way. But a lot of times we aren't very specific. But, God knows what we need. And He brings us exactly what it is that we need, even if it's sometimes not always what we think we wanted or intended. And another important lesson is that, life is challenging. Life is difficult at times. And being able to take a step back and have a sense of humor about the absurdness of life is a very helpful thing. And it can be entertaining at times. Master said, life is for our education and our entertainment, but how few of us are truly either educated or entertained, right? And as our affirmation said this morning, that being able to sort of take a step back from things and not take life quite so seriously, it helps us to develop non-attachment, right? We begin to realize that what's really important in life and some of these sort of other details that aren't quite so important, really, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. Another important lesson for me in all of this is that, what we put our energy and attention and our deep desire into does eventually come to us. I really wanted a butter dish. And sometimes it comes to us more quickly and sometimes more slowly, but it does eventually come. Is there the passage in the Gita, those who go to lesser gods go to their gods, but those who come to me, go to me, come to me, right? So first things first, right? Really, in the last analysis, the only thing that matters is God and our relationship with God and knowing God. And we're going to keep, until we sort of figure that out, and we're just, sort of grabbing for all of these playthings in the world, right? We'll latch onto it and enjoy it for a while, and it may bring us some fleeting happiness, but then pretty soon we're on to the next thing, trying to fill that void. And until we can sort of step back and see that bigger picture and realize that really all we want is God, then we just sort of continue in that cycle. So let's get there sooner rather than later. Let's give our priority to God now. God bless you.